Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our program tonight. We've got John Rostern, and John is the regional. I'm going to call you the regional muckety muck. I mean, you're a fairly big figure over at Coalfire Systems here for, I guess, the East Coast. You are the go-to man. John, you've got a tremendous amount of IT audit experience and background. It's certainly something that we want to dip into a little bit tonight in our time with you. We read a lot out there that's going on in these reports, and one of the things, that I'd like to hear from you certainly is quite frankly, your experience in that IT audit space. All right. What are some of your experiences, John, with the small to medium-sized business community?
Well, I think some of the issues that we're seeing in the SMB space, first off, interestingly, as the larger businesses become better equipped to defend against technology-based threats, and I'm not only going to include the internet because now with mobile media and things like that, it really goes far beyond that. But as the larger enterprises become better equipped, the threat seems to get pushed down into the smaller businesses. So on aggregate, the overall threat picture seems to increase just because of population. The interesting thing that happens, though, is that many in the SMB space have exactly the same threat profile as the larger enterprises, but they have nowhere near the resources that they need to adequately assess or deal with that threat. So in many cases, it's sort of like you're fumbling around in the dark. You know you have problems, but you don't have the resources, and you really don't even have a flashlight so that you can appreciate what the threats are that you're confronting.
Well, it is, it's interesting you say that because, as one of the things you and I had been discussing, the SMBs in aggregate have the same risk profile as some of the larger companies that are out there. One of the things I started off with the program with was how a lot of these small to medium-sized business companies are really the veins and the arteries to the bigger companies that are out there today. I don't think they could survive without them.
Exactly. It's the entire information ecosystem. At some point in the supply chain, you're going to realize the impact of a lot of these threats that are out there, and not having a clear picture of what their risk profile is just makes it more difficult. They're literally fighting a fight that they don't understand. It's even worse than the analogy of bringing a knife to a gunfight when you don't even know that there's a fight being waged. One of the perfect examples is the hacktivist groups, the Anonymouses and the LOLSECs, for example. Right now, for the most part, they're happy and content to target the more visible enterprises, the Visas and the MasterCards, for whatever reason that's out there. But I'm sure Stratfor down in Texas, when they were targeted, I'm sure they didn't view themselves as being a primary piece of the critical infrastructure, but yet they ended up on the target list. So it's, as I said earlier, it's very hard to predict where the threats are moving, but we're seeing it's the old doorknob rattling thing. Someone is going to continue to rattle doorknobs until they find one that's open. And typically what we're finding is the people in the SMB space are going to have the most open doorknobs. It's a question of cost, it's a question of capability, it's a question of resource.
So, John, let me ask you this. As you go into a small business like that, I mean, what is the one major issue, that maybe you're being confronted with? Is it cost? Is it expertise? Is it time? What is it?
Well, cost and resources are really substitutes for one another. And the earlier point about not having an adequate picture of risk really makes it impossible to determine where you should be spending your money. We're also seeing, frankly, that there's a lot of bad advice that's going around out there. We're seeing a lot of folks that are selling security in a box, or buy product X and you'll solve all of your security problems. The problem is they're not sure exactly which security problem they're solving, and there really are no silver bullets that are out there. So until people get a good handle on where the risks are, what their threat profile looks at, I mean, let's face it, we had a meeting with a business today. I don't know if they would consider themselves to be an SMB, but the conversation was on the lines of, look, we don't handle information. We're not a bank. We don't handle that type of information that will make us a profile, that would make us a high-profile target, I should say. However, they are concerned about the risks that they do have. So maybe someone getting into their customer information, or maybe someone getting into their employee database and things like that. So let's look at what those real risks and threats are. Many companies don't even have that discussion internally, much less with a third party.
Yeah. Well, as you say, it's an accurate risk profile. I'm just wondering how many of these companies really understand about that risk profile and kind of building it up, to that point. I think we constantly see companies kind of throwing money at things and
Right.
really not understanding what exactly they're doing. It's a quick fix. So one of the reasons why we find a lot of these companies buying these point of sale systems right off the internet, not from a valid retailer or something like that, but off of eBay or Craigslist or some other crazy place, and they want to get the company up, running, and cheap, but they don't understand the inherent risk, and they don't even know how to build a risk profile.
Right. Well, and the interesting thing about that is that what's typically is the driver is some regulatory driver, or some a mandate, such as the payment card industry data security standard, or in the financial industry you might have Graham Leach Bliley or something like that. And so they're doing it to check the box in terms of compliance. And as you point out, you get to these sort of knee-jerk reaction stages. Take the example of buying a point-of-sale system from Craigslist or from someplace on the internet. Well, you really can't be compliant any longer unless you're running a compliant point-of-sale system. However, the way that compliance in the credit card space works is that until you're breached or until you have an incident, and in many cases you're not going to be asked to even report out on this. But guess what? When you sign that merchant agreement with your bank, you signed up to be completely responsible for full compliance with the payment card industry data security standard. A lot of people in the small and medium business space, when you talk to them about this, they're not even aware of what they signed up for when they signed that merchant agreement.
Well,
why don't we hold it right there,
and we'll be right back with John Rostern from